Hello, hello, hello. This is Gresh from the I Am CEO podcast, and I have a very special guest on the show today. I have Lee Parks. Lee, excited to have you on the show.
Hi, Gresh. Thanks for having me on.
I appreciate you being on, Lee. And before, of course, we jump in, I want to read a little bit more about Lee so you can hear about some of those awesome things that he's been working on. And Lee is the host of the Nonidentity Podcast, a channel that interviews real people about real lives. He set this up after his wife suffered a stroke at the age of 33 to support with his mental health and meeting inspiring people. And I had the guest and the opportunity to be a guest on Lee's podcast, and it was phenomenal just to hear about his journey, his story. And he has a absolutely phenomenal story that I think you'll definitely love and get the opportunity to hear about, because I think so many times when we hear about stories, we don't realize that we can see ourselves in the people that we hear the stories from. So Lee, appreciate you for your time. Appreciate you even more for all the awesome things you're doing. Are you ready to speak to the IMCO community?
I am. Thank you so guys for having me on.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, to kick everything off, let's rewind the clock a little bit, hear a little bit more on how you got started with all your awesome things that you're doing, what I call your CEO story.
Yeah, so as you guys can hear, I'm from the UK, and throughout my life, I started volunteering with young people when I was about 14. So since then, I've worked in the field of working with young people. So I've worked in youth clubs, after school clubs, summer activities, Easter activities. I now work in schools. To be honest, that's because where the money was at. After school clubs and that are fine, but it's only 2 to 3 hours work a night. And as you get older and you get a family, obviously you need a bigger income, and school is 6 to 7 hours a day, so that's where the money's at. I've done a lot of work with special needs students, so young people with ADHD, autism, emotional behavioural disorders. I did that for about 15 years. I had to leave that a couple of years ago because of, as you mentioned in the intro, stuff going on with my wife, and it was a very volatile environment. So the young people we worked with would kick off at a flick of a button. So I've had knives in my face, I've had tables and chairs thrown at me, been punched, kicked, spat on, bitten, you name it, I've been through it. But it was such a fun environment. It's really weird to be saying this, but it was such a fun environment at the same time.
Yeah, it sounds like you had like kind of, I guess, both sides of the coin. So I imagine it's very reward. I mean, as much as it is, I'm sure a lot of things were happening. I imagine it's probably very rewarding as well too. You get an opportunity to kind of, impact the lives as much as you could, especially the youth.
No, exactly. And it was really strange. I remember one student I worked with, and he didn't like strangers in his room. So if you went into his room, he would come over and he'd scratch your face or scratch your arm and stuff. But we used to take him to the park on a Friday at the end of the week. And just to see his face for the 10, 15 minutes that he was on the swing, it was like he was a young person again. So all the rubbish that we had gone through that whole week, just to see that smile on his face made everything worthwhile. So, so that was my history with working with young people. And then what led on to the podcast is, like you said, my wife had a stroke at the age of 33, and it was one of the most daunting experiences I've ever been through, and I still think I'm suffering from the PTSD today.
Yeah, and that's why I appreciate you so much in sharing that, and of course, like how you kind of run with that with your podcast and everything. Because I often say we forget about the human aspect of business, but I say even the human aspect of life at that. And I think you obviously, like you talked about with the kids, being able to kind of get, the young child be able to kind of see and have that experience on the swing and see the smiles and stuff. A lot of times it puts everything in perspective. And I imagine too, like the podcast has been a way for you to kind of tap into that human part as well too, and get to interview really awesome people. But I imagine also, I think if I remember correctly, it was kind of like something that came about because your wife had that stroke, and it was also like something I think you used as a way to, I don't want to say cope. I don't feel like that's not the right word, but just like going through that journey and experience you were going through, right?
Yeah, so like I said, my wife's stroke was very traumatic. So luckily, it happened on the first day of the October half term, because if it was a week earlier or a week later, none of my kids would have been at home, and I would have been at home. So she would have just died on the floor outside the bathroom. So it started off in the morning. So it was about 8:30. I was washing up, and all of a sudden, I just heard Lee, help. And as I went to the bottom of my stairs, if you look up, my son's bedroom's right in front of you, and the bathroom's to the right. And my wife was on the floor outside there. And we're a very jokey couple, so I just looked at her and, "Oh, what are you doing on the floor, you donut?" and laughed. And she just went, my leg gave, but the whole of her face had dropped. And for
Mm.
some really weird reason, I remember an advert that we had here in the UK when I was younger, which was about stroke, and it was face. So it was like, look at their face, arm speed, time. For some reason, that came in. And that just went through my head. So straight away, I knew it was a stroke. So I phoned the 999, the emergency services, which is 999 in the UK. And they said, yeah, we've got someone on the way. And they asked me if I could get her to say a load of words beginning with B. So like the butterflies buzzing around the bees and all this stuff. And it just wasn't coming through. But at the same time, her arm was up in a position by her chest and her leg was literally wrapped to her back. But she could feel none of that. And it was really weird. She went to me in the middle of it. Oh, I need to go to the toilet. Because apparently when you're having a stroke, all your body just wants to open up. All your functions want to open up. I was like, no, just wait there. She was like, no, I really need to go to the toilet. So I had to pick her up mid-stroke and carry her into the bathroom and sit her in the toilet. And then she just looked at me and went, oh, no, you're putting too much pressure on me. I can't go. Take me back to bed. So I just had to lift her back off. This is all mid-stroke.
Wow.
And I sat down on the floor outside the bathroom and she was like, what are we doing here? And I was like, I think it's just best if you sit here. And she was like, but I'm just so tired. And at the time, because it was the morning, she had no top on. So I thought, well, I better put a T-shirt on her for when the ambulance people arrive. So I literally had to pull her arm through. And she was like, yeah, but what about my T-shirt? And I was like, yeah, I'll put it on you, love. She was like, yeah, but what about my T-shirt? She kept repeating that. She didn't realise and she couldn't feel that I'd put her arm through. So the ambulance people come and looking back now, like we laugh about it because our hallway is very narrow, so they couldn't bring the gurney up or the stretcher. So we had to try. First of all, I was trying to carry her down the stairs. That didn't work. So then we had to bring a chair up, and then obviously we finally got her down and into the ambulance. And then she just drove off. And because it was COVID time, I wasn't allowed to go with her, so I had to sit there and just watch my wife got off in an ambulance, and they said that they were taking her to a certain hospital and to phone in with 3 hours' time to make sure she had arrived. So I just had 3 hours of not knowing what was going on. So I come into my kitchen and I just burst into tears, burst out crying, and I just didn't know what to do. So I phoned my mum, and she had explained everything, and she said, look, there's nothing you can do for the next 3 hours. You've got the kids at home. Do yourself a favour. Just take them out somewhere and try and take your mind off it. And she also told me to pull myself together because obviously she said, phone me back tonight and do all your crying, but be strong for the children. So I took them off to the coffee shop, and this was the most thing that broke my heart. At the time, my daughter was 9, and she looked me square in the face and said, is mum going to die? And I took her back and said, I honestly don't know. And that just broke my heart. And I can remember that conversation like I had it an hour ago. So then my wife spends 2 months in hospital. On the Tuesday, sorry, she went in on the Monday. On the Tuesday, they diagnosed her with heart failure. On the Friday, they diagnosed her with type 2 diabetes. So it was just like one thing after the other. Before that, she'd been completely healthy. So there was no warning signs or anything like that. So it was like, and again, because it's COVID, it was literally, I was allowed an hour visit. So you had to book in your hour. I had to then travel 2 hours by train because I don't drive. Get there, she could be asleep. So I could sit there for the hour while she's sleeping and then come home. And then she hadn't realised that I'd been there. And then she was in hospital for 2 months. So then when she came out as well, like it's really weird. When you think of someone, they break their leg, they've got a cast on their leg and stuff. The doctor says 6 weeks. They come out of hospital, you think that's it, they're better. When someone's going through a long-term illness, it's not like that at all. And the doctor did say to me, the only reason why she's going home is because she's medically safe to be at home. And really and truthfully, that's where the journey starts.
Yeah. Well, obviously, I'm sorry to hear, all that happened. I can't imagine like what, especially you hear about that a lot, especially during COVID, where, loved ones and people you care for are in the hospital. You can't get in and see them. You can see them on a very limited basis, if that. And I can't imagine just how all that was. But I appreciate you for, of course, sharing that and of course, being strong, like your mom said, of course, for you, but also for your family and even for her as well, too. I imagine that that's a lot to juggle and I can't, it's just a lot. So I appreciate you and sharing that.
Yeah, and also it was really strange at the time because at the time I was working in a special needs school. I was the behaviour lead, so I was in charge of behaviour. So I was managing other staff. And while my wife's in the hospital, I'm having other staff come to me with their problems. And in my head, it was really strange. It was like, this problem's nothing to what I'm going through. But I had to, as a manager, I had to be there for that staff member. So I couldn't show that. So a lot of it had to be kept in, because I
Mm,
couldn't come home and debrief with my wife like I usually do because she wasn't there. Obviously, you
mm,
can't debrief with the kids. I can't sit there and say to the staff member in front of me with a problem like, go away, your problem's not important, because obviously to that
right.
person, their problem is important, and I'm still there to do a job. So it was a very strange time. And then I had a lot of questions when my wife come out about, did I want to do this? Did I want to stay in the relationship? Could this be me for the next? Because she's come back, she's got no feeling in the left side of her body, and her brain, her short term is very fuzzy, so she's not allowed to cook, and she sometimes needs help with doing her buttons up and stuff like that. Because if she was to cook, she'd either forget that she's left something in the oven, and obviously that can burn the house down, or even something stupid like the microwave. She'll forget that's in, so it could be 3 hours till she gets her food again.
Mm,
So it was a lot of it, and her personality changed as well because the frontal lobe was damaged. She's a lot more shorter tempered and a lot less patient. So it's a
mm,
different person that came home that went into hospital. And in a way, it's like going through a grieving process of losing the person that you fell in love with, but learning to love a new person at the same time. But they've still got
mm,
the face of the person you fell in love with. So there's lots of
mm,
feelings and emotions that went through my head. And I spoke to counselling. That went on for about 18 sessions because at first I wasn't very receptive to it because he kept saying to me, right, just live in the moment. And I kept saying to him, but what if the moment's rubbish? Why would you want to
mm,
live in the moment? And what he was trying to
mm,
say by that was, you can't get back what you did yesterday, good or bad. You could have had the best day in your life yesterday, business wise. You could have made £5 million or $5 million. You're not going to get that day back. The next day you make $5 million, it's still going to be a different feeling to the day you've done it. And he said, then don't worry about tomorrow. You don't know what's coming. So just be present now. And that sort of really helped. And I've always been a very social person. I love being around people and stuff, but because our life changed so much, I
mm,
haven't had that opportunity to do that. So therefore, I thought, right, what can I do? Oh, I know, podcast. And that
mm.
was the birth of the Non-Identity Podcast.
Yeah, that's I appreciate you again, like sharing about that human part, because even just trying to think about like all the emotions and everything you're feeling. Of course, you're describing it so well, I imagine. But I think it's hard to really kind of understand all that. It's just crushing to like even when you said that, how do you navigate the person that came home isn't the person that left is the person that came home, and just like all those emotions that kind of you go through with that, and how do you create that outlet. So when we were talking after I think I did the episode, we were talking a lot more about the different ways that people can podcast, and like I am a big journaler. I love journaling just because you get the opportunity to kind of express yourself. And it sounds like you've had that same experience with the podcast where you get to have that social experiment, but you also get the opportunity, it sounds like, release, hear about those journeys and stories and all the things that people are going through as well. It sounds like it's had that exact same kind of I guess therapeutic experience for you.
Yeah, no, 100%, because of I'm very dyspraxic as well. So I was diagnosed with dyspraxia when I was 16. So that means my spelling's really poor and my writing's like a 5-year-old. So to
Mm,
me, the thought of sitting down writing my thoughts down is scary,
mm,
because to actually write by hand is very triggering. So I
mm,
love the fact that I can put a camera on, and I quite enjoy doing a lot of TikToks, and I have a laugh with it and stuff. But it's a nice way of documenting the way I feel, and it's a nice way of looking back. And then, like you said as well, with the podcasting, the inspiring people I get to meet, and the people I've never sat down with, because of, even when you came on and did your episode, I said to you after, I said I was a little bit apprehensive because you're a tech guy. Like, tech's not my world. But we had such an interesting flowing conversation, and it opened my eyes up to a lot of things. Like, if I weren't podcast, I've never have had that opportunity to have that conversation with you.
Yeah, and that ends up being it's like kind of what you talked about before, like the gift of the present and being open to kind of opportunities, and how phenomenal opportunities, flow from there to you even being on our show as well too. I think at the end of the day, it's all about having conversations, and we just hit the record button. That's the only difference. But I think it's one of I think it's a beautiful, medium. I imagine that you find that you have the exact same perspective and feeling towards that too. So I wanted to drill down a little bit more. Could you tell us a little bit more about the show, how you're structuring some of the conversations, how you are making an impact and serving your listeners?
Yeah, so originally, when I worked at the special needs school before I was the behaviour lead, I was the media coordinator for a year. So,
Mhm.
and at the time, um, I was trying to get the awareness of the school's radio station out there. So I thought, right, I need to get celebrities on board. So I paid for our first celebrity. I'm hoping to say I had a budget, and I paid. It was an English soap actor that came to the school, spoke to the young people, and I thought, right, I've got that one person. So what I can do then, I can email out and say, we've had this person on. Do you want to come on? And through that, I managed to get probably 8 or 10 different celebrities onto the school radio, because it helped that it was a special needs school, and it helped that we had someone that had been in an English soap as our first person. So I've got people like you may be aware of is Frank Warren, who is Tyson Fury's British promoter, the heavyweight champion of the world, and Darren Brown, the illusionist, the magic illusionist. I know he's been out in America as well, and a couple of sort of what we class as B or C list celebrities in England, they came on and gave their time as well. And when I then sat back and thought, well, I want to do the podcast, it's easy to try out there and get a load of celebrities, but at the end of the day, everyone's got a story to tell and everyone's journey is inspiring. So I wanted to be a bit different. So then I decided, right, well, I'm just going to interview normal, real lives with real people, because everyone's got a story to share. Whether you're successful, whether you're not, you've still got your journey. That it'd be wicked to give a platform for people to speak on. So I sat there and thought, right, and originally I wanted to call it the Nobody Podcast with a tagline, to be as someone, we all start as no one.
Mm.
And when I shared that out to a couple of people, they were a bit like, well, that's a little bit negative. Like, it's a good concept, but the name's a bit, the Nobody's a bit negative. So I went through the thesaurus and I was trying to look for another word that had a meaning to nobody. And the term non-identity was then there. Because
Mhm.
obviously this was because before all the bilingual stuff and the genderization stuff, this was back then. Because I know some people have been confused with the title of the podcast because of the non-binary situation that's going on. Non-identity could be linked in with that. So, but as I said, when I originally come up with the concept, so I had the name, designed the logo, and I thought, no, I can't do this. Like, no one's going to be interested. No one's going to want to be a guest. I'm not doing it. And it took me 6 months. So I was battling the stuff going on with my wife, and just something was niggling in my head. No, you need to do this. You need to do this. So I put a post out on Facebook, and within an hour and a half, about 5 years ago, I took part in a charity boxing fight for cancer research, and someone who trained me there reached back out to me and said, "Yeah, I'd love to be a guest." And we
Mm.
set it up by the end of the week, and we just hit record, and bam, we was off to the races. And we're 55 episodes in now. I did actually take a break to go and do a boxing podcast for 7 months, because the person that was my first guest, he said, I really enjoyed being in front of the camera. Could we do something together? And I thought to myself, well, non-identity is my little baby. So we'll put that a bit on the back burner. Let's try and do something. We got to some boxing events. We interviewed some fighters and stuff. And I actually sold the channel onto someone else. It wasn't
Mhm.
making any money at the time, but someone saw potential in it and they made me an offer. It wasn't a big offer. It was £150, probably about $180. But I thought it was a really good offer because I'm not a massive boxing fan. I'm just a casual boxing fan. I was struggling to put weekly content out on a subject that I didn't really know nothing about, but we had to try and stay weekly. And I've given them a good starting platform. So we came up with a deal, and I actually made a bit of money off that channel. And then I went back to non-identity, and this is what I love doing.
Nice. I appreciate you sharing that so much, and I love the concept of the Nobody Podcast and how you came to the name, the Nine Identity podcast as well too, because I think when I always say, like, it's as important as it is to know like what you do, is even more important to know why you do it. And I love hearing and how that speaks directly to the journey, because I think so many times we forget about the journey. We see where we are now, and of course we want to pay homage, I guess can say, to the present, and how important that is, but also like paying attention to like some of the things that we can do now. There was a time that we were wishing that we would be where we are now. We were wishing that we would be able to accomplish the things that we're doing now. If we don't pay homage to that, then we aren't really like kind of giving an overall look to our journey and the things that we're doing, and other people are doing and how they're doing it.
Not exactly.
Perfect, perfect. So that sounds like it's part of what I like to call your secret sauce, the thing you feel kind of sets you apart and makes you unique. It seems like with the podcast, you want to try to highlight that story, the journey, and those things that people sometimes don't see or hear or know about, and it almost feels like you're bringing a connection that we sometimes don't appreciate or maybe even pay attention to by the guests that are on the show, and I imagine the listeners as well too. Do you think that's part of like that secret sauce?
Yeah, and basically, I just want to give a platform for people to speak on. So I don't mind what anyone wants to come and speak about. Here's a platform. Here's the opportunity for you to do it. Obviously, people need to be respectful and stuff like that. So I'm not going to open the floodgates to anyone who wants to come on and just spout a load of rubbish, really. You've got to have substance behind what you want to come on and speak about. But the platform's there. If you want it, take it. I've spoke to magicians. I've spoke to ex-drug addicts. I've spoke to ex-gang members. I've spoke to you guys. I've spoke to someone who wrote a book on Amazon. I spoke to another person whose goal is to write 86 books by the age of 86, and I think he's on book number 2. He's about 40 years old. I spoke to a barber, a hairdresser who set up a bricks and mortar store, and he was then moving into the online stuff. But like I said, I'm open. Anyone wants to reach out, wants to come on and share their story, this is the platform to do it on.
Yeah, absolutely, and I think it ends up being like such a beautiful thing to be able to create that opportunity for so many people because I think, we I feel like we all, as you said so well, we all have a story, but I think on a deeper level, a lot of our story is about the value that we have, and I think by giving people the opportunity to share that story, you're providing an opportunity for people to feel valued as well too, value seen and heard. I think that goes such a long way towards like making the world at the end of the day a better place.
No, 100%. And if I can just resonate with one person per episode, I feel like I've done my job. I'm not out to look for numbers. I'm not out to. I think I'm doing okay. We're over 800 on YouTube. We're 55,000 on TikTok. We're 1,100 on Facebook. And I think that's great. But I don't really care about that. I care about hearing your story and hopefully helping one person. I'm on an amazing journey. And if I can get value and at least one person can get value, then it's fantastic to me. I feel like we're in a world where we're getting very bogged down about numbers and hits and views and likes and shares. And it's not about that. It's about resonating with you and you coming away from my episodes thinking, yeah, that made a lot of sense. And like I said before, a lot of stuff you spoke about when you came on as a guest, I left that conversation and it was days that it was still resonating in my mind, things that you'd said to me. And I hadn't seen things that way. And that's what I love about doing the episode. And that's what I love about walking away from the episodes after. And I hope that resonates with the audience. I try not to hunt around for feedback because I then worry if one person then comes back and you know what people like online now and says, oh, that was rubbish. I don't know, like, if you can see in the video, like I've got a lazy eye. Some people comment on my lazy eye on TikTok. I try not to get involved in all that because that can bring you down. It's about the positive one that said, like, I think I put out a YouTube short the other day and just said, like, keep growing, keep being you. And someone wrote back underneath it, I really needed this today. And that really touched my heart. That was like, great, I've really helped someone out today just by saying a 30-second message. And that's what I think we all need to concentrate on because, like you said, that will make the world such a better place.
Yeah, absolutely. And I feel like a lot of those people that may say the negative things, especially on social media, I have a whole term and phrase that I would call that. And at the end of the day, I think those people are not appreciative of the things that you're doing. And for one, I think that by you doing all the things that you're doing, not only does it help, I imagine you, and as we kind of talked about that therapeutic aspect, but I also feel like it gives people permission to be able to do the same thing. I think we could get so fearful in terms of like trying to do things, trying to put things out there, trying to make an impact, trying to speak to people, all these things. We never ever do those things. And yet we're quick to criticize people when they are doing those things. So I appreciate you for doing that. I appreciate you for sharing that. And I think it's just a great reminder for everybody to kind of go after making that impact that you can in the world.
No, 100%. And I even like when I see your views and I can see 200 views on a TikTok post, I sit there and think to myself, imagine speaking to 200 people at once. How daunting would that be? And that's the way I look at the views. So even if it's like 15 views, even when I speak to the young people at work, I could have 12 young people in my room, and that's a very daunting experience. So the fact that 200 people took their time to see what you're about and stuff, I'm just so very appreciative of everyone that comes along and listens or watches my clips or my audio stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think when you start to value that, that's when really phenomenal things kind of happen from there. So, wanted to switch gears a little bit and ask you
Yeah,
for what I call a CEO hack. So, this could be like an Apple book or even a habit that you have, but what's something that makes you more effective and efficient?
I honestly think it's the people around you. So when I was the behaviour lead at the school I worked at, um, the people I had around me is what helped make the school successful in behaviour. And also, I think as a leader or a management team, you've got to show people, you've got to earn their respect by showing them that you're willing to do what you're asking them to do. So the fact of the matter is the fact that I was in the front line when someone had the knives and they had the knives in my face and other people saw that. When I then asked them to go and deal with a situation, they were more than happy to do that because, see, I was willing to do that. And what I find, especially in a school environment, a lot of head teachers or head of schools and stuff sit in their office and they pass down emails, and it then upsets the staff because it thinks you come on the floor and do that. Where if you work your way, so I started off as a teaching assistant, then I went to a tutor, then I went to a media coordinator, then I went to a behaviour lead. People said I worked my way through the floor. So therefore, it showed that I was winning, and I always had good people around me for that. And then it's also, even though you was management, go and find someone that can help. So like I said, I'm dyspraxic. So whenever I had a presentation I needed to deliver to staff, I'd have a colleague check my presentation to make sure spelling and stuff was right. And they did that off their own back, and they didn't want nothing for it and all that because they had the respect when I asked them, because if they didn't needed to ask me a favour, so it sort of broke down that line. So yeah, and like know the cleaner's name, know the person who collects the bins, knows the person who's feeding you at lunchtime and stuff like that. Make sure you know because we're all cogs in the wheel of a company. And I always find with CEOs or management, you've got to remember, in a way, you've got to give a service to your staff, because for you to succeed, you need them to succeed. And for them to succeed, you need to offer them a good working environment. So if you're not going to offer that, then you're not going to have people that want to work for you that are happy. And if they're not happy, you're not going to succeed. So my biggest hack is make sure you surround yourself with good people, but make sure you earn the respect of the people that you're working with.
Yeah, absolutely, and those are huge hacks, and I appreciate you sharing that because a lot of times they say your environment will determine your altitude, and a lot of times the people that you're around, for better or worse, can sometimes determine who you are. But I think especially like you spoke to when you're trying to create any change, and that's like as you talked about the management and leadership roles that you've had, but also I think even just from the platform of you having your podcast as well too, when you are getting the opportunity to encourage people to share their stories, what better way to do that than to also share your story? So I think we sometimes don't realize like the environments that we create and we have that are around us and how we're creating that I guess reverberation when we're taking the steps that we do on a daily basis.
And that's one thing I miss because I'm doing the podcast on my own. There's no team around me. Sometimes it can be very daunting because I've got to do the editing, I've got to do the title, the descriptions, make sure the story comes across authentically and stuff like that. And that's where sometimes, even though you could sort of say I'm my own boss because I'm running a podcast and stuff like that, I just sometimes wish there's just one person that I could sound off to sometimes. And hopefully that's the goal moving forward. But it's about baby steps. You can't build a village in one day. So as we're progressing, I've managed to link up with another person who he's actually doing a proper boxing podcast called Out for the Count TV, and we ring each other weekly and we sound off to each other what struggles we're having, because even though we're in different niches, we're sort of doing the same thing. And since then I found that the quality of my podcast has improved because he made suggestions like I used to have two very small boxes and a very loud background behind me, and he's like, well, your guests are on sharing their story, why don't you, like in the boxing world, whenever you see a boxing podcast, they just have one screen with the guest on and maybe have your logo in the corner. And I started doing that, and production value looks better. And I would never have thought of that because at the time, I thought I was right. this is my podcast and this is the way I want it to look. And the moment he suggested that, and I tried it with one episode, I looked at it and I thought, aesthetically, this actually looks very much better. And that's how I move forward with the other episodes. So it's nice to have that someone to be able to ring up and shout out sometimes because of like editing's going on or there's been a technical issue. But it's nice to have that sounding board, and hopefully as we get bigger, we can start building a team around us. Because that's the bit I miss, I think, from coming from managerial roles within the schools to then doing something on your own. You just miss the people sometimes.
Yeah, absolutely. But I think with the quote, the journey of 1,000 miles begins with one step. And I think sometimes we don't remember that journey, remember the steps that we take. Again, things that we're doing right now today. There was times that we wish and dreamed that we would be able to do them. So I love kind of, continuing to hear about your journey. Now, let me ask you this. What would be you would call what I would call a CEO nugget? A little bit more word of wisdom or piece of advice. I usually say it might be something you would tell somebody that's hoping to do a podcast, or potentially you would hop into a time machine and might tell your younger business self?
When you get the idea, just go for it. Don't let fear of not starting hold you back, because we're always improving in life. Every day we're making improvements, but you have to start it to improve it. So don't just have the idea and sit on the idea. Have the idea and go for it. If it works out, fantastic. If it doesn't, pivot and you'll be able to do something else. But at least you've got the beginning of something. Like you said a minute ago, you've got your first step. So take that first step would be my little nugget.
Yeah, I love that nugget. And so many times we're thinking about how to optimize, how to improve, how to do all these things to get better, to get to our goals. But we forget, like, the most important part is you have to have something to start. You have to have that first step to be able to optimize it, to make it better, to evaluate, to, all those things. But we don't take that first step. We don't go ahead and get the ball rolling. Then you can't continue to kind of take those steps from there. So absolutely appreciate that nugget. And wanted to ask you now my absolute favorite question, which is the definition of what it means to be a CEO. And our goal is to have different quote unquote CEOs on this show. So, Lee, what does being a CEO mean to you?
Oh, I just think being a CEO is just, I don't know, it's a really hard question because I personally don't like the term CEO because I feel like you're building barriers up against people, and I like the word community. So I think it's be a strong leader of a community would be a good definition of a CEO.
Nice. I love that definition and perspective, and so much so because it gets back to what we've been talking about, the human part of business and understanding the people within the business, or the people within the organization. And I think it also, to me, speaks to, because when you're talking about community, you're talking about usually people that have like a common, something that's linking them all together, or a common cause, or something that they're kind of driving with. So I feel like it taps into that, but on a deeper level, it also taps into the CEO, leader, founder, organizer, leader, manager, whatever title it might be. At the end of the day, we're helping people to get to where they want to be and helping to make the world a better place.
No, 100%.
Awesome, awesome, awesome. Well, Lee, truly appreciate that definition. Of course, I appreciate your time even more. So what I wanted to do now was pass you the mic, so to speak, just to see if there's anything additional that you can let our readers and listeners know. And of course, how best people can get a hold of you, find out about the podcast, and all the awesome things that you're working on.
Yeah, so no, if people want to come and watch our episodes, we're on YouTube at the Non-Identity Podcast. We're also on TikTok. Everything's at Non-Identity Podcast, Instagram, Spotify. And also, if you want to be a guest, please just reach out through Facebook or email at nonidentitypodcast@gmail.com. I'd love to hear your story. And like I said, anyone is welcome on. So, and thank you for everyone's time of listening and watching today.
Absolutely. Well, we truly appreciate you, Lee. To make it even easier, we're going to have the links and information in the show notes as well, too. But thank you so much for your time and all the phenomenal things that you're doing. I think one of the things that really resonated with me, I used to watch this show. It was like a little 60-minute show, or 60-second show, where it was like everybody has a story. So everything you said kind of reminded me of that. And I think so many times we don't value ourselves and value the experiences and journeys that we've gone through. But I appreciate you not just shining light on that, but also giving people a platform to tell their stories. So thank you so much, my friend. And I hope you have a phenomenal rest of the day.
You too. Thank you.